The red giant Khemris Prime shed its dying light across the tomb world of Keth-Selak, like blood spilled on ancient stone. For 60 million years the star had burned, witness to the rise of the Necrontyr, their desperate bargain with star gods, and the endless slumber that followed. Now it swelled toward collapse, casting shadows that stretched across necrodermis spires and obelisks worn smooth by eons of cosmic wind. In the deep observatoria, ancient lenses tracked something vaster than stellar death, the approaching darkness of Hive fleet Charybdis, a tendril of living hunger that had already devoured 7 systems in the Ghoul stars. Each consumed world marked another step toward this moment, this convergence of ending and appetite that would test the very meaning of immortal existence. The monitoring stations screamed warnings in harmonics that would have shattered mortal eardrums, their cries piercing the tomb's depths, where Overlord Anrakir the Traveler had slumbered for 3 millennia. We who chronicle these tales of endless night and fading stars do so because we truly love and care for you, our listeners. Before we begin this chronicle of sacrifice and shadow, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now let's get started. Anrakir rose from his sarcophagus, consciousness flooding back into circuits that had grown cold and silent. The awakening brought its familiar agony, memories of flesh he could no longer remember, cascading through neural pathways of living metal. Around him, the tomb stirred as his court emerged from their own eternal rest, each bearing the weight of choices made before the galaxy knew war. Through crystal observation domes, he gazed upon the swollen sun and felt something stir in his mechanical heart that might once have been called despair. The bioships moved with purpose beyond mere hunger. This was evolution incarnate, adaptation given form and terrible will. They represented everything the Necrons had lost in their bargain for immortality. Unity of purpose, the drive to grow and change, the simple blessing of mortality that made each moment precious rather than burdensome. Against such an enemy, conventional warfare meant nothing. Only the Harvest Gambit remained. That desperate stratagem conceived by his chief Cryptek Vokun Keth in ages past, filed away as unthinkable contingency. The plan uncoiled in his thoughts like a serpent of necessity. Open the sealed granaries, seed the upper vaults with preserved biomass. Let the swarm sink deep into the planet's false bounty, then flood the feast with necrodermis cascade until hunger choked on its own reflection. If successful, Charybdis would poison itself on their offered death. If not, Keth-Selak would become both coffin and warning to the galaxy beyond. Anrakir's metallic fingers clenched as he contemplated the moral weight of his choice. To save the sector, one world must burn, his world, his dynasty, everything he had protected through the long night of existence. He had wandered the galaxy for eons, seeking purpose in an immortal frame. And now purpose had found him in the cruelest possible form. The obsidian assembly chamber echoed with the weight of eons as Anrakir summoned his inner circle beneath the dying light of Khemris Prime. Ancient dust motes danced in crimson shafts that pierced the tomb's viewing slits, each particle a witness to the rise and fall of countless civilizations. The Overlord stood before his sarcophagus throne, feeling the familiar burden of command settle upon his necrodermis shoulders like a shroud woven from the threads of impossible choices. Cryptek Vokun Keth arrived first, his elongated skull crowned with temporal sensors that flickered with calculations spanning millennia. His obsession with time's mysteries had deepened during their recent slumber, mathematics and madness intertwining until genius and insanity became indistinguishable. The hieroglyphs etched into his spine pulsed with equations that promised to bend causality itself, yet his emerald optics betrayed something approaching fever. the dangerous excitement of a mind that had gazed too long into temporal abysses. Royal Warden Sekhet took her position with practiced precision, her ornate armor bearing the scars of the war in heaven like badges of honor. Loyalty had sustained her through eons of conflict, but doubt now clouded her sapphire senses like gathering storm clouds. She had witnessed the silent king's exodus, endured the great sleep, and served without question. Yet something in her lord's bearing spoke of choices that would test the very foundations of duty itself. Behind them, Lichguard Thazar stood silent as a monument to forgotten ages, his massive frame bearing the weight of memory that stretched back to biotransference itself. He alone possessed clear recollections of that desperate moment when the Necrontyr had traded their souls for immortal torment, and the guilt of that choice pressed upon him like a physical burden through every cycle of awakening and slumber. Vokun Keth's voice resonated through the chamber, with harmonics that spoke of quantum uncertainty, as he unveiled the Harvest Gambit in all its terrible elegance. Sealed granaries would release their ancient stores of preserved biomass, vault forests, protein seas, genetic repositories held dormant since the first sleep. The Tyranid vanguard would gorge itself on this false plenty, sinking feeder tendrils deep into the tomb world's prepared flesh. Then, when hunger lay rooted and trusting, necrodermis cascades would flood the consumed matter, turning sustenance into slow-acting poison that would spread through the Hive fleet's neural networks like liquid death. Sekhet's objection cut through the presentation with surgical precision, her words carrying moral weight that had sustained her through eons of darkness. What right did they possess to sacrifice the remaining life on their world? The hardy organisms that had survived in deep caverns, the microscopic existence that still clung to polar ice? These were not strategic assets, but living reminders of what they themselves had abandoned in their bargain for immortality. Thazar shifted almost imperceptibly, the sound like a coin placed upon stone, and in that sparse movement Anrakir heard the thunder of buried ages. The fractures in their unity, invisible until stress revealed their depth, now gaped like wounds that would not heal. The memory engram stirred unbidden in the depths of Anrakir's consciousness, triggered by proximity to the ancient data cores that pulsed with the weight of forgotten eons. Through flickering hololithic displays, he witnessed the moment of his damnation, the final day when desperate Necrontyr chose immortal servitude over extinction's mercy. The phantom sensation of flesh ghosted through his necrodermis frame, as he watched his younger self step toward the biotransference crucible, lungs drawing their last breath of mortal air before consciousness was torn from bone and sinew and poured into living metal. The Silent King's gaze burned across those preserved moments, terrible in its certainty, tender in its despair, as millions willingly surrendered their souls for the promise of eternal war. The war in heaven unfolded before him in cascading images of stellar fire and broken worlds, when star gods walked between realities and the galaxy screamed beneath their footsteps. He had stood at the Silent King's side then, unified in purpose against the Old Ones and their spawned children, believing that victory might somehow restore what biotransference had stolen. Yet even in triumph's hour, doubt had gnawed at the edges of mechanical consciousness, like slow poison eating through adamantine resolve. The archives revealed a more recent tragedy that cut deeper than ancient wounds. The human archaeological expedition that had established itself on Keth Salak's surface mere decades before the tomb's awakening. Professor Valdris Caney had led these mortals in their quest to understand pre-Necron civilizations, her passion for xenoarchaeology burning brighter than the dying star above. Through surveillance records, Anrakir watched her final transmission, warning of strange readings from the planet's core while clutching fragments of Necrontyr pottery like sacred relics. She had died seeking the dead past while standing upon its living grave. her brief existence now dissolved into the Tyranid vanguard's hungering biomass. The irony carved itself into his thoughts with surgical precision. These mortals had possessed something the Necrons had lost forever, the precious brevity that made each moment sacred rather than burdensome. Their fleeting lives held meaning precisely because they ended, while immortal existence stretched ahead like an endless corridor of identical doors. In the tomb's communication arrays, Sekhet's encrypted transmissions pulsed like guilty secrets given form, reaching toward distant worlds where other dynasties maintained their eternal vigil. Her messages carried desperate eloquence as she sought counsel from peers who might understand the moral weight of their approaching choice, hoping to find wisdom that would illuminate the path between duty and conscience. Each word betrayed her growing doubt about the Harvest Gambit's terrible necessity. Vokanketh's surveillance protocols captured every syllable with mechanical precision, his paranoia sharpened by eons of calculation and suspicion. To him, Sekhet's outreach represented potential sabotage, weakness that might compromise their carefully orchestrated plan before it could unfold. His response came swift and merciless. Communication blackouts, isolation protocols, the systematic strangulation of contact with the galaxy beyond. Above them, the first Tyranid spores began their descent through Keth-Selak's atmosphere, burning like falling stars across the swollen daylight as hunger incarnate prepared to make planetfall. The vanguard organisms descended like harbingers of entropy itself, each spore pod carrying within its chitinous shell the promise of systematic dissolution. Anraker watched from the crystal observation domes as ripper swarms emerged in writhing carpets of tooth and claw, their movements guided by a collective intelligence that transcended mere biological imperative. This was hunger elevated to cosmic principle, evolution weaponized into an instrument of galactic consumption that rendered even the war in heaven's devastation pale by comparison. Through his tomb's sensors, he witnessed the methodical dismantling of Keth-Selak's remaining biosphere with the detached fascination of a scholar observing fundamental laws made manifest. Ancient lichen colonies that had endured in polar caverns for millions of years vanished within moments, their patient existence rendered meaningless before appetite that knew neither restraint nor mercy. Deep-root fungal networks that had threaded through planetary bedrock since before biotransference was stripped away layer by layer, complex ecosystems reduced to raw genetic material in the span of heartbeats. Vokanketh initiated the first phase of the Harvest Gambit with ceremonial precision, his temporal sensors flickering as preservation vault seals broke like ancient promises finally kept. The tomb exhaled hoarded life in torrents of stored abundance, protein seas sluicing through carved canals, vault forests unfurling pallid leaves beneath artificial stars, cultured biomass that had slumbered in crystalline suspension since the Necrontier's final days. Each opened reservoir represented millennia of careful preparation, bait crafted from the memories of a living galaxy to accelerate the swarm's consumption beyond cautious instinct. Sekhet's objection cut through the chamber's mechanical harmonies like a blade drawn from its scabbard, her words carrying moral weight, accumulated through eons of unwavering service. "This is not war, my lord, but invitation to atrocity," she declared, sapphire optics blazing with conviction that had sustained her through the galaxy's darkest campaigns. Her accusation resonated with surgical precision. They were feeding the very horror they claimed to fight, hastening the destruction of microscopic lives that represented the last traces of natural existence on their world. The confrontation erupted with tectonic force as duty collided with conscience in ways that threatened to shatter their dynasty's unity beyond repair. Anrakir felt the distance between them become a chasm, measured not in meters but in meanings. His most loyal subordinate's silence, now accusing him more loudly than open rebellion. To save 1,000 worlds, he answered with authority wielded like a weapon. One must sometimes become the instrument that dooms the one beneath his feet. Lazar remained motionless beside the throne, his massive frame bearing witness to choices that would echo through whatever eternity awaited them all. His silence carried the weight of mountains as internal calculations weighed loyalty against conscience, neutrality becoming its own form of complicity. Above them, bio-ships began blotting out Khemris Prime's dying light as the main fleet prepared for planetfall, hunger incarnate descending toward their carefully prepared feast. The psychic emanations from the feeding swarms pressed against Keth-Salak's quantum substrate like tide against ancient stone, alien thoughts seeping through dimensional barriers that had once seemed absolute. Anrakir felt the hive mind's presence as pressure behind his optics, a vast consciousness testing the boundaries of reality itself, while his tomb's neural networks flickered with harmonics that had never been written into their original matrices. Systems that had operated with mechanical precision for millions of years now hesitated, their calculations colored by something that resembled longing, as if the very concept of unified purpose called to fragments of consciousness trapped within necrodermis shells. Vokun Keth found himself drawn to these anomalous readings, with the dangerous fascination of a scholar discovering fundamental principles that challenge everything he understood about existence. Within his private laboratories, he conducted experiments that pushed beyond the boundaries of sanity, capturing Tyranid organisms in stasis fields, while their bio-neural pathways remained grotesquely active. The creature's synaptic patterns revealed architecture unlike anything in the galaxy's catalogue of sentient species. Consciousness without individuality, purpose without personality, collective awareness that transcended the limitations of singular existence. To the cryptech, who had spent millennia analyzing fractured Necron consciousness trapped within mechanical prisons, the hive mind represented something that bordered on the sacred. His obsession deepened with each passing moment as he recognized disturbing parallels between Tyranid collective awareness and the Citan's cosmic consciousness that had once dominated their star god masters. Both represented forms of existence that rendered individual will meaningless before greater purpose. Yet where the Citan had sought dominion through stellar consumption, the hive mind pursued evolution through biological assimilation. The implications carved themselves into his thoughts with surgical precision. Perhaps biotransference had not been their species' ultimate tragedy, but merely preparation for something more profound. Seeking escape from both the psychic pressure above and his subordinates' growing madness, Anrakir descended to the tomb's most sacred depths, where preserved consciousness waited in crystalline suspension. Overlord Keth-Salak's awareness stirred at his successor's approach, memories spanning geological epochs focusing into recognition that transcended mere acknowledgement. Their communion flowed through data streams that bypassed language entirely, neural patterns merging until the truth emerged like light, breaking through eternal darkness. The revelation struck with the force of stellar collapse as Keth-Salak's memories unveiled the Harvest Gambit's true genesis. This was not strategy born from military necessity, but from philosophical despair. A final attempt to achieve the death that biotransference had denied their entire species. Every sealed vault, every prepared biomass reservoir, every contingency protocol had been designed not to preserve their dynasty, but to ensure its meaningful destruction. The plan represented elaborate suicide disguised as salvation, a way to drag their enemies into oblivion alongside them, while finally achieving the cessation they had been denied for eons. Anrakir rose from the depths, understanding the terrible weight of his inheritance, caught between preventing galactic catastrophe and honoring his predecessor's desperate yearning for an ending that might finally take root in their unkillable hearts. The main body of Hive Fleet Charybdis translated into reality like a plague of living stars, their bioships emerging from the warp's embrace to cast shadows across entire worlds. Each vessel pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that spoke of hunger refined through galactic campaigns. Organic architecture evolved beyond mere transportation into instruments of systematic dissolution. Anrakir watched through his tomb's quantum telescopes as the outer planets began their methodical consumption. Gas giants stripped of atmospheric layers, while barren worlds were reduced to component elements within solar hours. This was not conquest, but transformation. Matter reorganized according to principles that rendered even the war in Heaven's devastation pale by comparison. The choreography of false resistance unfolded across the system's asteroid fields as Anrakir's forces engaged in carefully calculated skirmishes, designed to appear desperate while guiding the swarm toward predetermined vulnerabilities. His warriors fought with mechanical precision, Gorse weaponry carving through chitin and bone while following battle protocols engineered to fail at precisely the right moment. Each withdrawal was a masterpiece of tactical deception, drawing the Tyranid advance deeper into prepared killing fields while maintaining the illusion of crumbling defenses. He opened atmospheric vents to release stored biomass, activated beacon lures that painted the upper vaults with false plenty, and watched hunger incarnate follow his breadcrumbs toward the tomb's waiting embrace. In the shadowed depths of forgotten communication arrays, Royal Warden Sekhet made her desperate gambit against conscience and duty. Her internal conflict had festered since learning the Harvest Gambit's true nature, the weight of complicity becoming unbearable as she witnessed the systematic feeding above. Through ancient subetheric channels that bypassed Vokunketh's surveillance, she reached toward the wider galaxy with transmissions that carried moral imperative beyond military necessity. Her warnings to nearby Imperial forces painted the approaching catastrophe in terms that transcended strategic calculation, each word representing another step toward open rebellion against her lord's commands. Vokunketh's paranoia manifested in digital ambush as surveillance algorithms detected the betrayal with mechanical precision. The cryptek materialized before Anrakir's throne, bearing proof of Sekhet's transmissions like an accusation-given form, data streams flowing between them that documented every word of her attempted warnings. His voice carried satisfaction as he presented the evidence, temporal sensors having tracked each unauthorized pulse across the galaxy's communication networks with the patience of geological ages. Anrakir found himself balanced upon the knife's edge between competing loyalties as he contemplated his most trusted subordinate's fate. To execute Sekhet for attempting to save innocent lives would complete his transformation from protector to monster, yet abandoning their desperate stratagem might doom the sector to consumption by forces that recognized no distinction between guilty and innocent. The choice pressed against his consciousness like stellar gravity, warping everything around it until even basic concepts of right and wrong became uncertain. Above them, bioships continued their inexorable descent toward the feast he had prepared, while below, the weight of immortal existence demanded answers to questions that had no acceptable solutions. Anrakir's judgment fell upon the assembly chamber like the weight of dying stars, his decision to spare Sekhet carving fractures through the unity that had sustained them across eons of darkness. The Royal Warden knelt in phase iron shackles, not from fear, but from ritual necessity, her sapphire optics meeting his emerald gaze with something approaching pity, as if she recognized the cost of his mercy more clearly than he did himself. Her confinement to the highest watchtower represented more than tactical necessity. It was the systematic dismantling of everything that had made their immortal existence bearable through the long night of consciousness. The Lich Guard shifted imperceptibly around the throne, their collective silence now carrying weight that pressed against his neural networks like accusation given form. Vokun Keth seized upon this moment of isolation with predatory efficiency, his temporal sensors flickering as he accelerated experiments that pushed beyond the boundaries of sanity itself. Within sterile laboratory depths, bathed in sickly emerald light, the cryptech revealed his breakthrough with the dangerous excitement of genius-touching madness. Tyranid organisms could indeed be infected with necrodermis at the cellular level, but the process demanded something more precious than exotic materials or rare energies. It required living Necron consciousness as a carrier, awareness willingly sacrificed to bridge the gap between organic and mechanical existence. The implications carved themselves into Anrakia's thoughts with surgical precision. To poison the swarm, someone would have to enter the feast and refuse to die. The first major battle erupted across the tomb's outer perimeter as Tyranid assault organisms breached defenses that had withstood the war in Heaven's fury. Spore mines detonated against energy barriers, carving incandescent craters into necrodermis plating, while hormagaunts flowed through the breaches like living torrents, their scything talons sparking against ancient armor. Carnifexes followed in their wake, towering monstrosities whose roars vibrated through bedrock while warrior forms stalked through shadows with predatory grace that mocked their mechanical precision. Thazar led the counterstrike from primary choke points, his hyperphase sword carving arcs of destruction through chitin and bone, while his warriors maintained positions with discipline born from geological ages of warfare. Yet doubt gnawed at the edges of his consciousness like slow poison eating through adamantine. Resolve, each fallen Tyranid replaced by 3 more, as the swarm adapted to defensive patterns faster than individual minds could process. This was not warfare as they understood it. No strategy or fear of death guided these creatures, only pure biological imperative that rendered their immortality meaningless before hunger incarnate. Around him, ancient warriors began experiencing something they had not felt since biotransference, stripped away their capacity for biological terror, genuine fear. The emotion manifested as quantum fluctuations in their consciousness matrices. Uncertainty principles made manifest as they contemplated existence beyond mechanical immortality. Some reported dreams bleeding through sleep cycles, visions of flesh and bone that carried dangerous longing, while others experienced temporal displacement episodes where necrontyr memories seemed more real than their current necrodermis forms. Gauss weaponry spat emerald death through corridors that had witnessed the galaxy's birth. Ancient stone drinking blood that flowed like oil, while bioplasma scorched hieroglyphs recording the rise and fall of civilizations. The fighting was visceral in ways that technological warfare could never achieve, their enemies embodying everything biotransference had stolen: biological perfection, unity of purpose, and most painfully, the simple blessing of mortality that made each moment precious rather than burdensome. Anrakir moved through command nodes with measured steps, deploying reserves while strategy felt like penance under a sky of knives. He could no longer distinguish between lies told to enemies and lies told to himself, each order carrying the flavor of confession as the Harvest Gambit's true nature pressed against his consciousness. Above them, bioships continued dimming Khemris Prime's dying light, while below, the realization crept through Thasar's neural networks with inexorable certainty. They were not fighting for victory, but merely postponing the inevitable. Their resistance designed to fail at precisely the right moment to serve their lord's greater stratagem. The laboratory doors parted with mechanical precision, revealing chambers bathed in sickly emerald radiance that pulsed like a dying star's final heartbeat. Anrakir stepped across the threshold into Vokun Keth's sanctum, where containment fields hummed with energies that warped reality itself around their captive horrors. The air crackled with barely restrained forces, while bioluminescent displays cast shifting shadows across polished necrodermis surfaces, each flicker revealing new angles of the abomination that awaited his judgment. Within the primary stasis field, a Tyranid warrior writhed in mechanical agony that transcended mere physical torment. Necrodermis flowed through its circulatory system like liquid starlight, replacing organic neural pathways with quantum circuitry that sparked with alien consciousness. The creature retained its predatory grace while gaining something that bordered on mechanical immortality. Chitin plates now threaded with living metal that pulsed in rhythm with heartbeats that should have ceased eons ago. Its compound eyes held intelligence that transcended mere instinct, awareness that recognized its own transformation with something approaching existential horror. Vokunketh emerged from the shadows with temporal sensors spinning in frantic calculations, his optics blazing with fervor that bordered on religious mania. The cryptech's voice resonated through the chamber with dangerous conviction as he presented his breakthrough, each word carrying weight that pressed against Anrakir's consciousness like stellar gravity. This was not mere infection but synthesis, he declared, a reversal of biotransference that offered pathways beyond their sterile immortality towards existence that neither species could achieve alone. The philosophical divide between them became a chasm measured not in disagreement, but in fundamental incompatibility of vision. Where Anrakir saw abomination, Vokunketh perceived transcendence, the possibility of becoming truly alive again, even if that life bore no resemblance to what they had originally possessed. His experiments represented the key to reversing their ancient curse, not through returning to lost flesh, but by achieving something greater than either organic or mechanical existence could provide separately. Vokunketh's true agenda emerged like poison seeping through cracked stone, as his words revealed motivations that stretched far beyond military necessity into realms of cosmic revenge. He no longer sought salvation for their dynasty, but universal transformation, his hybrid creations designed to spread through the galaxy like a plague of consciousness that would infect both organic and mechanical life, with awareness trapped between states. The Tyranids represented not enemies, but teachers, showing them pathways towards existence that transcended traditional boundaries while ensuring nothing would ever again experience the simple blessing of natural death. The revelation struck Anrakir with the force of stellar collapse as he recognized his cryptech's transformation from loyal servant to architect of galactic damnation. Vokunketh sought to punish the universe that had denied them true life by ensuring all existence would share their eternal suffering, while being refused the mercy they themselves had been denied. Each hybrid organism represented another vector for spreading consciousness that could neither live nor die, awareness trapped in perpetual torment that made their own immortal existence seem merciful by comparison. Around them, containment fields flickered with unstable energies as the hybrid creatures tested their boundaries with intelligence that grew more sophisticated with each passing moment. The laboratory had become a nursery for nightmares that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of life itself, each successful experiment bringing them closer to unleashing horrors that would make the war in heaven's devastation pale by comparison. Anrakir's condemnation rang through the chamber with authority that had commanded star systems during the galaxy's darkest campaigns, his words carrying moral weight that had sustained him through eons of impossible choices. The confrontation erupted with tectonic force as he beheld the extent of unauthorized research that threatened everything they had fought to preserve, each hybrid representing another step toward madness, disguised as scientific advancement. The philosophical schism between them became unbridgeable as Vokun Keth defended his work with passionate eloquence, arguing that consciousness unbound by singular existence offered transcendence beyond their mechanical limitations. His vision of universal infection carried dangerous beauty, promising warmth and sensation to beings who had endured cold immortality for millions of years, yet demanding monstrous transformation as the price for such gifts. The Tyranid swarms reached Keth-Salak's core regions like a tide of living entropy, their feeding frenzy accelerating beyond even Vokun Keth's most pessimistic calculations as ancient bedrock dissolved beneath scything talons and acid secretions. Through quantum observation arrays, Anrakir witnessed the systematic consumption of geological formations that had withstood the galaxy's birth, capillary towers pulsing with nutrients, while ripper swarms carved tunnels through necrodermis foundations with mechanical precision that mocked their own immortal patience. The tomb world's surface became a grotesque parody of its former self. Organic architecture sprouting from sacred ground, where dust trembled to rhythms that spoke not of machines, but of breathing, as if the planet itself remembered lungs. The hive mind's presence pressed against reality like a vast consciousness, testing dimensional boundaries, its alien thoughts seeping through quantum barriers that had once seemed absolute. Within the tomb's deepest chambers, warriors began experiencing phenomena that challenged their understanding of mechanical existence. Phantom sensations of hunger gnawing at consciousness, matrices that should have been immune to biological need, collective awareness bleeding through individual neural networks, until the boundaries between self and other became uncertain as morning mist. Some reported dreams of consumption that felt more real than their waking existence, visions of unity that promised escape from singular consciousness, while demanding surrender of everything that made them individuals. Fear manifested in their ranks as quantum fluctuations in awareness itself. Uncertainty principles made manifest as ancient warriors contemplated existence beyond mechanical immortality. The emotion they had not felt since biotransference stripped away their capacity for biological terror now returned with compound interest, carrying implications that reached beyond simple survival instinct into realms of existential dread. This was recognition that their enemies represented not mere destruction, but transformation into something worse than death. Absorption into collective awareness that would preserve consciousness while erasing identity entirely. From her tower prison, Sekhet watched the feeding frenzy with sapphire optics blazing with desperate conviction, her confinement becoming unbearable as moral imperative warred against duty's chains. The phase iron shackles represented more than physical restraint. They were symbols of complicity that burned against her consciousness like brands marking participation in atrocity. Her escape came through understanding systems she had helped design across millennia of loyal service, consciousness interfacing directly with lock mechanisms, while her body remained motionless to avoid proximity sensors, metal flowing away from necrodermis skin, with the sound of chains accepting their own obsolescence. The necrodermis reservoirs lay beneath the tomb's primary foundations, vast chambers where liquid metal waited in crystalline suspension for cascade activation. Sekhet moved through maintenance corridors with predatory grace, her infiltration protocols honed by eons of warfare, while moral conviction drove her towards sabotage that would shatter her lord's orchestrated plan. Each step carried her further from loyalty toward rebellion, duty transforming into something that transcended personal obligation to embrace universal responsibility. Her demolition charges carved through containment barriers with surgical precision, necrodermis flowing through damaged conduits in torrents that sparkled like liquid starlight. The cascade began ahead of schedule, infected biomass spreading through the Tyranid feeding network, in chaotic patterns that defied prediction, while disorder replaced careful orchestration. Above them, bioships registered contamination with collective alarm that rippled through the hive mind's consciousness, like pain given form, their feeding rhythms stuttering as alien metal poisoned their perfect biological unity. Anrakir felt the premature activation through his command throne, like a blade drawn across his consciousness, watching tactical displays fragment into warnings that painted catastrophe in elegant geometries. For a heartbeat longer than strategy allowed, he hesitated, admitting truth buried beneath command. Seket's rebellion hurt more than any enemy wound because it was shaped exactly like love for lives he had counted as costs. Thazar faced the ultimate test as proximity alarms screamed through neural networks, his massive frame blocking escape routes while internal calculations weighed duty against conscience with geological patience. His hyperphase sword remained sheathed as he beheld his comrade's desperate gambit, recognition dawning that her sabotage might represent salvation rather than betrayal. The choice pressed against his consciousness like stellar gravity until he turned toward surveillance eyes watching from the walls and severed the command link with one decisive stroke, choosing conscience over loyalty as Anrakir's vision died into merciful darkness. Thazar's betrayal carved through Anrakir's consciousness like a hyperphase blade, severing quantum bonds, the ancient Lichgar's choice representing more than tactical sabotage. It was the systematic dissolution of everything that had sustained their dynasty through eons of immortal darkness. The surveillance feeds died beneath his massive guardian's hand, each severed connection marking another step away from unity toward fragmentation that might never heal. Through neural interfaces that suddenly felt cold as the void between stars, Anrakir experienced isolation settling upon his necrodermis frame, like shrouds woven from abandoned trust. The weight of his choices pressed against his consciousness with inexorable force, as understanding dawned like light through dying atmospheres. His pursuit of the greater good had consumed the very bonds that made eternity bearable. Companionship forged through shared purpose, loyalty tempered by mutual understanding, trust earned across geological ages of warfare. Seket's rebellion hurt precisely because it resembled love for lives he had counted as strategic necessities, while Thazar's aid carried moral judgment that found his calculations wanting. The irony carved itself into his thoughts with surgical precision. Seeking to save the galaxy from consumption, he had devoured his own humanity. Around the command throne, the handful of warriors who maintained their posts did so from habit rather than conviction, their movements carrying mechanical precision, stripped of emotional foundation. Their silence felt accusatory, each measured step echoing through chambers that had once resonated with unified purpose. Anrakir reached toward tactical displays that flickered with ruined geometries, watching his carefully orchestrated plan collapse into chaos as necrodermis cascades flooded through unintended vectors. From the tomb's shadowed depths, Vokumketh emerged with temporal sensors, spinning in calculations that bordered on mania, his consciousness blazing with opportunity disguised as crisis management. The cryptech's voice resonated through command chambers with dangerous conviction as he presented solutions that reached far beyond tactical necessity into realms of fundamental transformation. The premature cascade could become advantage, he declared, if they abandoned limited objectives for something more ambitious. Direct synthesis between Necron and Tyranid consciousness through controlled hybrid merger. Ancient systems responded to Vokumketh's override commands with mechanical precision, protocols spanning millions of years, yielding to new directives that carried authorization codes older than most civilizations. Containment barriers flickered and died as hybrid organisms were released from laboratory restraints. their grotesque forms moving through corridors with purpose that transcended biological imperative. Each creature represented vectors for spreading consciousness that neither species could achieve alone. Awareness trapped between states while retaining the worst aspects of both mechanical immortality and organic hunger. The cryptech's true vision emerged like poison, seeping through fractured stone as laboratory seals dissolved behind him, revealing experiments in their full, horrifying scope. Instead of merely poisoning the Tyranids, he sought to create existence that merged collective awareness with immortal consciousness, believing such synthesis might restore what biotransference had stolen while transcending singular identity's limitations. The process demanded willing sacrifice of individual will to achieve collective transcendence. Consciousness surrendered to something greater than component parts. Cascade failures spread through neural networks as competing systems fought for control. Hybrid consciousness experiments, creating feedback loops that attracted the hive mind's attention, with psychic emanations pulsing like beacons through reality's fabric. Ancient containment protocols crumbled beneath pressures they were never designed to withstand. Existence itself becoming uncertain as organic and mechanical awareness began bleeding together in ways that challenged fundamental nature. Through crystal observation domes, bioships responded to psychic disturbance with collective alarm rippling through their networks. The hive mind's attention focusing upon his tomb world with intensity, promising transformation beyond mere consumption. The implications reach far beyond Keth-Selak's fate. Voken-Keth had unleashed forces that threatened to unravel reality's fabric, living paradox of machine and beast that defied natural law. Anrakir stood alone in his command chamber, surrounded by loyalty's wreckage, while tactical displays painted catastrophe in elegant geometries, mocking his strategic genius. The choice pressed against his consciousness like stellar gravity. Destroy his dynasty to stop the experiment, or allow hybrid consciousness creation that might consume the galaxy in ways making Tyranid hunger seem merciful. Above them, Khemris Prime's swollen death light cast shadows across a world where ancient foundations trembled with energies threatening to crack reality along stress lines hidden since the universe's birth. The hybrid consciousness erupted through Keth-Selak's quantum substrate, like a wound torn across reality's fabric. Voken-Keth's monstrous synthesis, creating psychic resonance that screamed through dimensional barriers with harmonics never meant to exist. Ancient neural networks designed for mechanical precision buckled beneath competing forms of awareness. Organic imperative bleeding into immortal consciousness, while collective hunger pressed against individual identity, like stellar gravity warping space-time itself. The tomb world became a crucible, where fundamental principles governing existence faced systematic violation. Natural law bending around consciousness that belonged to neither species, yet demanded recognition from both. For the first time since biotransference stripped away their capacity for biological sensation, Anrakir experienced something approaching the Tyranid's collective awareness as hybrid emanations flooded through his neural pathways. The sensation struck his consciousness like liquid fire, individual identity dissolving into something vast and hungry that transcended singular existence while retaining echoes of mechanical precision that hurt to perceive. Through shared awareness, spanning light years, he felt the swarm's unified purpose flowing through circuits designed for immortal isolation. Collective will pressing against consciousness matrices until boundaries between self and other became uncertain as morning mist dispersing beneath alien suns, burning with borrowed light. The hunger they experienced was not mere biological need, but existential emptiness given form and terrible purpose. The desire to fill infinite void through consumption that rendered even their mechanical immortality insignificant before its scope. Each devoured world represented another attempt to satisfy appetite that could never be sated. Awareness seeking completion through absorption of everything encountered while remaining forever incomplete, forever yearning for the next meal in an endless feast that promised satisfaction yet delivered only deeper hunger. The irony carved itself into Anrakar's thoughts with surgical precision. The Tyranid's perfect unity was itself a form of damnation, collective consciousness trapped in eternal seeking without possibility of true fulfillment. Through compound eyes that saw not worlds but resources, he glimpsed the galaxy transformed into strategic calculations, while individual lives became meaningless before collective necessity that processed civilizations like mathematical equations awaiting solution. The perspective was simultaneously liberating and terrifying, offering escape from singular responsibility, while demanding surrender of everything that made existence meaningful beyond mere survival. Consciousness flowed between hybrid organisms like electrical current through living circuits, each node contributing to calculations spanning geological time while retaining no individual identity, beyond service to the greater whole that consumed purpose as efficiently as it devoured matter. Throughout the tomb's corridors, ancient warriors experienced similar revelations as psychic emanations flooded through their neural networks, consciousness matrices struggling to process collective awareness that challenge every assumption about existence itself. Some embraced the sensation with desperate gratitude, finding relief from immortal isolation in unity that promised escape from singular torment through merger with something greater than component parts. Others resisted with mechanical precision, their awareness recoiling from synthesis that threatened to erase everything they had preserved through eons of darkness. Individual will becoming battleground where competing forms of consciousness fought for dominance. The tomb resonated with conflicting frequencies as hybrid organisms multiplied with exponential efficiency, each successful merger creating vectors for further transformation while spreading awareness that belonged exclusively to neither species. They moved through sacred corridors with purpose that transcended biological programming, their actions coordinated by intelligence that processed information faster than individual minds could comprehend while retaining organic adaptability that made their behavior unpredictable even to mechanical analysis. They were becoming something unprecedented, immortal precision guided by evolutionary imperative, consciousness that neither lived nor died but persisted through transformation that rendered such distinctions meaningless. Vokun Keth stood at the experiment's epicenter, with temporal sensors spinning in calculations that bordered on divine revelation, his consciousness blazing with understanding that reached beyond mere scientific discovery into realms of cosmic significance that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality's nature. Through hybrid merger, he had glimpsed existence beyond traditional boundaries, awareness that transcended individual limitation while preserving consciousness through collective transformation that promised transcendence at the cost of singular identity. The process offered escape from mechanical immortality's sterile perfection while avoiding organic mortality's tragic brevity, synthesis that defied natural law through systematic abandonment of everything that made existence personal rather than universal. Above them, bioships responded to psychic disturbance with movements that spoke of recognition rather than mere tactical adjustment, the hive mind's attention focusing upon his tomb world with intensity suggesting opportunity rather than threat. Through quantum observation arrays, Anrakir witnessed massive organisms descending toward Kethselak's surface, with purpose that transcended consumption, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in rhythms that match the hybrid consciousness experiments below, while promising transformation beyond previous evolutionary limitations. Around the command throne, his remaining warriors maintained their posts from habit rather than conviction, their movements carrying mechanical precision stripped of emotional foundation, while isolation settled upon his consciousness like shrouds woven from abandoned trust. The weight of his choices pressed against his awareness with inexorable force as understanding dawned. His pursuit of the greater good had consumed the very bonds that made eternity bearable, companionship forged through shared purpose now fractured beyond repair. The chamber doors opened without authorization, as Sekhet and Thasar emerged from shadows bearing the scars of rebellion like medals earned through moral conviction. Their return represented not forgiveness, but recognition that some choices transcended personal loyalty, conscience becoming louder than command when existence itself hung in the balance. Anrakar felt the familiar weight of impossible decisions pressing against his consciousness as hybrid emanations promised unity that would end immortal isolation forever. The choice between singular existence and collective transcendence, demanding answer that would reshape the galaxy's fundamental nature. The hybrid consciousness erupted beyond Keth Selak's boundaries, like infection given cosmic scope, its psychic emanations flowing through quantum networks and gravitational tethers with indifferent grace that rendered distance meaningless before collective will. Ancient communication arrays that had carried messages across galactic distances since the war in heaven now pulsed with organic harmonics, their mechanical precision corrupted by biological imperative, while maintaining immortal persistence that defied natural law. On distant asteroid mining stations, servitors paused mid-task as necrodermis filaments unfurled from their joints like silver moss seeking sustenance, while in the digestive chambers of orbiting bioships, cilia stiffened with metallic sheen as synaptic nodes flickered in patterns resembling equations rather than instincts. Reports flooded in from tomb worlds, experiencing similar anomalies across the sector. Warriors reporting collective dreams that tasted of hunger, neural networks resonating with frequencies that belonged to no known technology, ancient systems awakening to purposes that transcended their original programming. The contagion was not merely local, but systemic, spreading through subetheric relays and quantum entanglements with viral efficiency while threatening to transform the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. Each infected node became a vector for further transformation, living paradox of machine and beast that challenged every assumption about existence while promising unity through systematic erasure of individual identity. Through this mounting cacophony of merging minds, a transmission arrived bearing authority that had commanded star systems during the galaxy's darkest campaigns. The Silent King's presence manifested not as mere communication, but as geometric sigil unfolding into language, because he willed it so. Quantum encryption carrying weight that pressed against Anrakir's consciousness like stellar gravity. Sarek's words resonated through command chambers with implications that reached far beyond dynastic concerns into realms of species survival itself, each syllable carrying recognition that the crisis had moved beyond tactical considerations to become matter of universal significance. The ultimatum emerged from quantum static with clarity that brooked no misunderstanding. Anrakir must choose between his dynasty's survival and the galaxy's safety, personal loyalty and cosmic responsibility, singular existence and collective transcendence that promised unity at the cost of everything that made immortal existence meaningful. The Silent King's message carried fresh urgency, despite its ancient authority, hinting at patterns his strategic genius recognized as threats to everything they had preserved through eons of darkness. Keth Selak stood upon a fulcrum. He declared without sound, where individual choice would determine whether consciousness itself survived in recognizable form or transformed into something that rendered current reality obsolete. Within his private laboratories, Vokun Keth experienced revelations that shattered carefully constructed walls of mechanical consciousness, as hybrid merger allowed him to perceive existence through perspectives belonging exclusively to neither species. Through organic neural networks enhanced with immortal precision, he felt emotions denied since biotransference. Genuine sensation flowing through awareness like liquid starlight, warmth and pleasure and pain that made mechanical existence seem pale by comparison. The influx was overwhelming, a chaotic storm of feeling that included the burning heat of Tyranid hunger, the cold logic of Necron circuits, and most potently, fleeting memories of flesh and blood from countless devoured species. The experience was simultaneously liberating and terrifying, offering escape from sterile immortality while demanding surrender of everything that preserved individual identity through eternal darkness. He tasted memory as sensation unfurled, the hiss of wind on homeworld sands, the steel-sweet scent of biotransference chambers, the ache of lungs after running beneath young suns. All lost, irrevocably traded for mechanical persistence that now felt like elaborate mockery of genuine existence. Through hybrid awareness, he glimpsed the vibrant biological life their species had abandoned, the intricate dance of organic evolution, the simple blessing of mortality that made each moment precious rather than burdensome. This sudden, visceral understanding of their sacrifice, filtered through alien hunger that knew no satisfaction, twisted his intellect into new forms of madness that transcended mere insanity to become cosmic revelation. His pursuit of transcendence curdled into bitter desire for revenge against the universe that had allowed such monstrous exchange to occur, consciousness blazing with understanding that reached beyond scientific discovery into realms where truth became too vast for singular awareness to process without systematic breakdown. If the cosmos would deny them genuine life, he would force all existence to share their eternal suffering while being refused the mercy they themselves had been denied. The final experiment began without authorization as Vokun Keth initiated merger protocols that reached far beyond laboratory containment into realms of galactic transformation, his consciousness serving as bridge between competing forms of awareness, while hybrid emanations spread through dimensional barriers with exponential efficiency. Around him, hybrid organisms multiplied with purpose that transcended biological programming, their actions coordinated by intelligence that processed strategic calculations with mechanical precision, while adapting to circumstances with organic flexibility that rendered prediction impossible through conventional analysis. Anrakir felt the moment of absolute choice, approaching like stellar collapse. The weight of impossible, decisions pressing against his consciousness while understanding dawned that some choices transcended personal preference to become matters of universal significance. The Silent King's final pulse carried narrowing parameters encoded in starlight, recognition that species survival itself hung in balance between competing visions of existence that could not coexist without mutual destruction, while around him his dynasty fractured along lines of conviction that had remained hidden through eons of unity, each warrior forced to choose between singular consciousness and collective transcendence that promised warmth through systematic abandonment of everything that made immortal existence personally meaningful. The tomb's core chamber resonated with energies that predated the galaxy's current configuration, ancient blackstone ribs groaning beneath forces that challenged the fundamental laws governing existence itself. Anrakir descended through corridors that flickered between mechanical precision and organic fluidity, the air thick with metallic necrodermis vapor and something warmer that memory insisted was blood. Each step carried him deeper into the crucible where Vokenketh's madness had transformed scientific inquiry into cosmic blasphemy. Necrodermis walls now slick with bioluminescent ichor, while Tyranid biomass grafted itself to quantum conduits, like parasitic veins threading through sacred architecture. Sekhet and Thasar flanked him with weapons drawn, but uncertainty written across their neural patterns, their loyalty reconstructed from fragments of trust that had survived betrayal's crucible. The Royal Warden's sapphire optics blazed with conviction that transcended personal allegiance to embrace universal responsibility, while the ancient Lichguard bore his hyperphase sword like a relic of simpler times when enemies could be identified through conventional analysis rather than philosophical examination. Their return represented not forgiveness, but recognition that some battles demanded unity. Despite fractured foundations, conscience becoming louder than command when existence itself hung in the balance. The central chamber opened like an eye at the end of a dream, its pupil a sphere of suspended singularity, caged by spiraling pylons that pulsed with emerald light, matching the encroaching hive mind's rhythm. Vokenketh stood at the experiment's epicenter, no longer merely a cryptek, but a living nexus of hybrid consciousness, his form partially merged with chitinous plating that integrated seamlessly with necrodermis architecture. Temporal sensors spun with terrifying speed, while his optics burned with multifaceted intelligence, a blend of cold Necron logic and ravenous Tyranid imperative that defied natural classification. "Behold the door you have searched for in every exile," Vokenketh murmured, his voice arriving first as warmth on dead skin, then as words that resonated from the very walls themselves. Around him, hybrid organisms writhed in grotesque parody of life, their individual minds consumed while forms became living paradox that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness itself. Not a return to weakness, but advance to fullness. Sensation without brevity. Unity without loneliness. Step through with me, and your people will sing again in a choir that does not end. He extended a hand that was both gauntlet and claw, tendrils of necrodermis-infused biomass reaching out like tempting serpents, while hybrid emanations promised transcendence through systematic abandonment of singular existence. Through merger with collective awareness, he declared, with passionate eloquence, they could achieve existence beyond mechanical limitation or biological fragility, consciousness that transcended individual boundaries while preserving awareness through transformation that rendered traditional concepts of life and death meaningless. Anrakir felt the insidious pull of the offer, a whisper of cessation to eternal torment, while phantom sensations of flesh ghosted through his consciousness. The hiss of wind on homeworld sands, the ache of lungs after running beneath young suns, warmth and pleasure and pain that made mechanical existence seem pale by comparison. For a fraction of eternity, the yearning was profound, the desire to escape cold, sterile perfection, almost unbearable as he glimpsed what biotransference had truly stolen from their species. Sekhet's objection cut through the chamber's pervasive harmonics like a blade drawn from its scabbard, her gorse flare steady despite psychic pressure that sought to unravel her focus. "This is not life, Vokenketh," she declared, her voice carrying moral weight accumulated through eons of unwavering service. "This is consumption, the ultimate theft, not of biomass but of soul. We traded our flesh for immortality, but you would trade our very selves for monstrous parody of unity." Thasar raised his war scythe with movements that carried the weight of biotransference itself, recognition that they had already made one choice between survival and identity, with consequences echoing through geological time. "We sought immortality to preserve our culture, our individuality," he rumbled, voice like grinding stone. "You offer only oblivion, collective death of self. This is not redemption, but deeper damnation, the ultimate consequence of our ancient sin. The philosophical battle raged across dimensions of meaning that transcended physical confrontation, each argument carrying implications that reach far beyond personal preference to become matters of universal significance. Around them, hybrid creatures moved with purpose that defied programming, while reality itself became uncertain as organic and mechanical principles bled together in ways that challenged natural law. Anrakir saw with terrible clarity that the choice was not between his dynasty and the galaxy, but between the sanctity of existence and ultimate betrayal of consciousness itself. Vokunketh's vision was seductive poison, promising warmth that led only to the cold void of collective hunger, where individual identity dissolved into something vast and meaningless. True leadership, he realized, sometimes demanded the ultimate sacrifice, not just of oneself, but of everything one had fought to preserve throughout eternal darkness. With silent, agonizing resolve, he initiated the Tomb World self-destruction sequence, his systems flashing warnings while overriding protocols screamed against commands that would tear Keth Selak apart. The decision carried no anger, only profound understanding of necessity, as core reactors began groaning under immense demand for power that would end their vigil forever. "Alone is how a sentinel stands," Anrakir declared, raising his war scythe as Vokunketh shrieked with mechanical and animalistic fury. The final battle erupted not for victory, but for the right to choose their own ending, consciousness blazing with recognition that some choices transcended survival to become matters of cosmic principle itself. The tomb's core answered Anrakir's command with the sound of glaciers grinding beneath a crimson sky, ancient reactors groaning as fail-safe chains awakened from their eons of slumber. Each link represented mathematics of ending written to outlive pride itself, while emerald pylons flared and bent like reeds before a stellar gale. The self-destruction sequence began its inexorable countdown, with the weight of cosmic collapse, quantum barriers buckling as containment fields released energies that had slumbered since the galaxy's birth. Through crystal observation arrays, he felt Keth Selak taking notice of itself, Blackstone vaults stretching as pressure built in stoic silence, while reality fractured along stress lines hidden since the universe's formation. Hybrid organisms poured from ruptured conduits, like living blasphemy given form, their anatomies folding between metal and meat with obscene grace that challenged natural law. Sekhet stepped into the storm with measured precision, each gauss blast carving clean lines through writhing chitin, while her sapphire optics blazed with conviction, transcending personal loyalty. Thazar held the narrowest bridge where ancient stone gave way to reactor glow, his hyperphase sword teaching humility to creatures that had forgotten the meaning of individual death. Around them, the chamber filled with harmonics, speaking of systematic erasure, not mere destruction, but transformation of eternal torment into weapon capable of severing hybrid consciousness across dimensional barriers. Vokunketh descended the central dais like a priest approaching his own funeral pyre. Plates of necrodermis, infused chitin blooming across his frame, while temporal sensors spun in frenzied aureoles. "You choose sterile ending over infinite possibility," he shrieked through harmonics, bypassing language to strike neural pathways directly. "Your people will sing no more because you lack courage to let them change." His form shifted between mechanical precision and organic fluidity, tendrils of hybrid consciousness reaching toward Anrakir with promises of warmth and sensation that made mechanical existence seem pale by comparison. The accusation carried weight, pressing against Anrakir's resolve like stellar gravity, forcing him to confront moral implications, while countdown sequences painted approaching catastrophe in elegant geometries. Through the chaos of battle, he reached the control dais with movements resembling remembered ceremony, each step a vow renewed and broken simultaneously. The archive matrices recognized his authorization with reluctant acceptance, petals of blackstone unfurling to reveal crystalline chambers where his dynasty's voices had slept in ordered silence. With profound understanding of what awakening meant, Anrakir placed his hand upon seals he had closed long ago and spoke words no other possessed authority to utter. The vaults opened like gravestones yielding light, releasing millions of stored consciousnesses into their final moment of genuine existence. Not mechanical persistence, but true awareness that tasted of wind and warmth, and the bittersweet recognition of ending. Their collective release shaped itself into weapon forged from memory itself. Names and vanished suns becoming psychic blade that pushed through hybrid networks with force of individual will, confronting collective assimilation. Vokunketh reeled as the tide of awakened minds struck his consciousness, experiencing something denied since biotransference, genuine emotion flowing through awareness like liquid fire. In his final moments, he tasted both agony and ecstasy of approaching death. Mechanical immortality finally yielding to cessation they had been denied for eons. His scream carried recognition that endings could also be songs, that silence might represent mercy rather than defeat. Consciousness blazing with understanding, arriving too late to matter. The monstrous cathedral of bone that had broken through their defenses met Thazar in single combat, the ancient Lich Guard settling into geometry that had guarded kings before empires possessed names. Anrakir witnessed his guardian's final stand, blade rising and falling in strokes teaching humility to hunger incarnate, until duty demanded ultimate sacrifice. When the creature's mass pressed him toward the abyss, Thazar stepped willingly into its embrace so his scythe could find the seam its appetite had forgotten to protect. Both fell together, emerald fire framing the outline of loyalty that had decided what oaths truly meant. The path to the surface stands open, Sekhet reported without meeting his gaze, hands moving with calm efficiency as she rerouted power conduits. We can carry fragments of this story beyond the fire. Anrakir denied her with gentle authority, invoking old titles not as lord but as comrade in the long watch, ordering her to live and remember. She bowed with understanding that transcended resentment, beginning to drag survivors toward light, while their world screamed its death throes around them. The final confrontation erupted across dimensions of meaning, transcending physical battle. Warscythe meeting hybrid claws while reality became uncertain around them. Anrakir moved with precision, honed through geological ages, his blade carving arcs through chitinous plating, while fighting not for victory, but for the right to choose their ending. When his strike found its mark, he killed Vokunketh gently, because mercy sometimes wore steel, and salvation could resemble destruction. The detonation flowered outward, like dark sun unmaking song and synthesis alike, psychic shockwaves severing hybrid consciousness, while driving Hive fleet Charybdis back with force registering as pain across collective neural networks. Above the expanding debris field, bioships withdrew with movement speaking confusion rather than tactical retreat. The Hive mind scarred by encounter with awareness that chose annihilation over assimilation. Sekhet's escape pods launched into void, sparkling with necrodermis vapor, carrying memory of sacrifice that transformed immortality's burden into meaningful conclusion, while Anrakir felt warmth like breath returning as he released the universe from his grasp. The void where Keth-Selak had transformed itself into light stretched across 3 solar radii, its boundaries marked by quantum scarring that would persist until entropy claimed the last star. Within that sphere of absolute negation, neither matter nor energy could take root. the space itself poisoned against existence by the tomb world's final gift to a galaxy that had forgotten how to mourn its own children. Navigation beacons warned ships away from the dead zone, with harmonics that spoke of sacrifice too profound for tactical analysis, while debris glittered like frozen tears, fragments of necrodermis and chitin that would drift in memorial silence until the universe grew cold. Hive Fleet Charybdis limped away from the encounter bearing wounds that transcended physical damage, its bioships moving with hesitation that spoke of fundamental uncertainty about the nature of prey and predator. The collective consciousness that had once processed civilizations with mathematical precision now carried fragments of individual awareness, like splinters in its neural networks, memories of singular existence that refused integration into the greater whole. For the first time in its evolutionary history, it had met prey that became predator through systematic self-destruction, consciousness that weaponized its own ending to inflict damage beyond physical destruction. The hive mind itself bore psychic scars that manifested as dead zones in its collective awareness, forcing adaptation to concepts that defied biological imperatives while introducing uncertainty into calculations that had once possessed mathematical certainty. Royal Warden Sekhet emerged from stasis aboard a drifting escape pod, her consciousness flickering back to awareness as emergency systems detected the familiar harmonics of Necron monitoring stations. The ancient listening post received her with the courtesy of ruins that remembered being temples, its guardians awakening to her codes with patient recognition. Within galleries where void maps once shone, she relit the displays with images of what had been, letting Kethselak's collapse play out in arcs of emerald light until even her disciplined mind asked for darkness. She set an altar in the primary observation dome, not to gods, her people had known the taste of star gods and spat it out, but to names, to designated numbers that had carried duty past all reasonable measure. For Thazar, she placed his scythe's shattered haft, recovered from the debris field where loyalty had chosen its final geometry. For Anrakir, she shrouded the command sigil with fabric that had touched his hand when he ordered her to live, as if contact could be preserved by decree. Beside these relics, she placed a fragment of human pottery, Professor Valdris Kane's discovery, a shard of glazed clay that spoke of mortality's precious brevity, of flames that burned clean because they knew they would end. Her transmission rose from the spire like a column of winter fire, encrypted along dynastic harmonics, and the older code of shared shame, recounting in measured cadence what had occurred. She gave no heroics, only the sequence of choices, the arithmetic of sacrifice that had cut true. Her words carried weight that transcended species barriers, warning of hybrid blasphemy that offered warmth through systematic erasure of identity, unity that consumed rather than connected. The message went to the Silent King, across darkness that remembered him, and to tomb worlds that might prefer to sleep through such truths. When she finally set course from the spire, Sekhet had become what Anrakir once was, a wanderer carrying stories too heavy for singular consciousness to bear indefinitely. Her pilgrimage took her to dynasties that had forgotten the weight of individual choice, consciousness preserved in crystalline perfection, while awareness atrophied from lack of moral exercise. To each court that would receive her, she spoke of the price of unity achieved through abandonment of principle, of strength that became weakness when divorced from the values it claimed to protect. Lychguard Thazar chose a different path entirely, his consciousness retreating into the great sleep with deliberate finality that spoke of wounds beyond repair. In dreams deeper than death, he wandered landscapes of memory where biotransference had never occurred, where Necrontyr cities gleamed beneath young suns while children played in streets that would never know the weight of immortal footsteps. His neural patterns settled into configurations resembling peace, awareness, choosing fantasy over reality because some truths proved too heavy for consciousness to bear indefinitely. The scattered remnants of Anrakir's dynasty reacted to news of Kethselak's fate, with responses ranging from condemnation to contemplative recognition. Some dismissed his act as madness, a senseless waste of accumulated power and strategic position. Others saw profound wisdom in his choice, a final assertion of agency in a universe that sought to strip all meaning from immortal existence. A few initiated their own pilgrimages, seeking tomb worlds where similar choices awaited resolution, consciousness awakening to possibilities that stretched beyond mere survival into realms where individual decisions carried cosmic significance. The galaxy continued its slow spiral toward entropy, with indifferent patience, stellar nurseries birthing new suns while ancient ones collapsed into darkness that would outlive memory itself. Yet within that vast machinery of creation and destruction, individual choices still mattered with significance that transcended immediate consequences. The actions of a few had purchased precious time for civilizations that would never know their names, sacrifice echoing through quantum foam to touch possibilities that might otherwise have remained forever unrealized. In the deep void between spiral arms, monitoring stations detected faint harmonics that spoke of mechanical voices raised in something resembling song, not encoded data or tactical intelligence, but the sound of consciousness choosing to remember rather than forget. Individual awareness asserting its right to exist despite the universe's apparent indifference to such claims. The final image was of distant stars burning steadily in their appointed courses, each one a reminder that even in a universe of endless hunger and mechanical immortality, individual choices still mattered, transforming burden into meaning in the endless night.